Welcome to VSOW The Deep Dive.
It's great to be here.
Our mission today is, I think it's fair to say, intensely ambitious. We are going straight past the headlines, beyond the global phenomenon.
Way beyond.
We're analyzing Michael Jackson not merely as the king of pop, but as a serious philosopher, a writer, and really a monumental subject of academic study.
That's absolutely right. We are exploring how his literary work, and this is key, specifically his 1992 collection of reflections, Dancing the Dream functions as the definitive roadmap.
A roadmap.
Yes, or maybe an indispensable blueprint for understanding his entire, and I think often misunderstood, artistic output. If you really want to know the why behind his music, his persona, his actions, our sources today argue that the answers are right there in this book.
And we have stacked up some pretty extraordinary material for this. The spine of our discussion is the academic perspective from Elizabeth Umsu's book review.
That's the review of the dangerous philosophies of Michael Jackson, his music, his persona, and his artistic afterlife.
Exactly. And we've paired that scholarly rigor with detailed summaries of the poetry and prose from inside Dancing the Dream itself.
And we have one more piece, which is a fantastic find.
It really is a transcript from a truly pioneering 1995 simulchat, which was a real-time online chat that Jackson had with thousands of fans.
On what, CompuServe, AOL, the very early internet.
The very early internet, yes. So the strength of this deep dive, I think, really lies in how these materials converge. We move from a structured, rigorous academic argument
to his highly personal, unfiltered written word.
And then finally to his spontaneous, real-time public communication. This tripartite approach, it lets us construct a really comprehensive, almost three-dimensional portrait of his creative motivations and his mortal persona.
It does.
Okay, so let's unpack this core idea because it fundamentally recontextualizes, I think, everything we thought we knew about Michael Jackson. The premise here is it feels revolutionary.
It is.
We are treating pop music's greatest icon with the same intellectual weight that's usually reserved for, canonical literary figures. The research actually claims Dancing the Dream isn't a footnote. It's not a side project.
Not at all.
It is the essential key to grasping his artistic intentions and should be studied right alongside his albums.
And that entire idea, that whole approach, it starts immediately with the academic methodology that's used to even approach his life's work in the first place.
Right.
So the book, The Dangerous Philosophies, is presented as a crucial intervention. It's the first academic study to cover his art through the whole span of his life, from genuinely diverse academic perspectives.
So it's not just musicology.
No, not at all. It formally establishes him as a tremendously multifaceted artist whose work, it argues, necessitates the kind of formal research usually reserved for figures, centuries removed from us.
It's a very deliberate move, then. Away from casual biography, celebrity journalism.
And a direct argument for his inclusion in serious global cultural discourse.
And the methodology used to build that argument is maybe as interesting as the subject itself. The author, Elizabeth Umsu, uses a cultural materialist approach. Now, for you, the listener, who might not be deep into literary theory, what's the significance of that? Applying cultural materialism to a global pop icon like Michael Jackson.
Well, it's a very specific and deliberate choice. Cultural materialism aims to construct a coherent cultural narrative by looking at a huge range of source material.
Which, as we said, is essential for him. His art spanned music, short film, dance, literature, fashion.
All of it. But the critical function of this methodology, in this context, is its ability to directly confront that historical prejudice against pop culture.
The idea that if it's popular, it must be simple.
Precisely. It is specifically designed to prove to researchers and readers that Michael Jackson's immense, unprecedented global popularity did not undermine his artistic value or his complexity.
That is a necessary fight to pick, isn't it? Because so often, if something is that widely consumed, so globally successful, it gets immediately dismissed. Critically, it's seen as simple or commercially calculated or just disposable.
And the cultural materialist approach just flips that script. It says, no, the mass consumption is part of the data. His influence, his reach, those are material facts, and those facts prove the depth of his impact, which therefore demands serious intellectual engagement.
Right. His work is the perfect, necessary test case for this.
It really is. His cultural artifacts, the albums, the videos, the writings, they're all seen as material that both reflects and shapes cultural ideologies.
So you can't dismiss the artistic complexity of, say, Thriller just because 66 million copies were sold.
Exactly. The methodology insists that we have to analyze why it spoke to so many people across so many different cultural lines.
And the need for this formal research, it really highlights a massive academic gap that the book identifies. The influence is so broad it almost defies categorization.
The sources outline a compelling, almost overwhelming spectrum of fields where serious academic discourse is needed. We're talking about film studies.
Analyzing his short films not just as music videos, but as actual cinema.
Yes, and African-American heritage, the use of his persona as a statement, musicology, examining his compositional techniques, the study of live performance as a distinct art form.
And Jackson's role as composer, persona, and auteur.
Right. Plus, dedicated analysis of his creative process, his fashioned as a form of communication, and even research into his posthumous representation and the management of his creative estate. It's huge.
The sheer breadth of that suggests his influence touches, virtually every corner of the modern humanities. But the foundational connection, the intellectual link that justifies applying this rigorous standard, it comes from the author's own background.
This is the pivot.
Connecting Jackson directly to canonical literature.
This is where we get to Shakespeare. So Amisu completed her master's degree in early modern English literature at King's College London. She was steeped in the methodology used to analyze the collected works of, Shakespeare or Marlowe.
Okay.
And she recognized that the sheer volume, the diversity of the output, and the deep philosophical undercurrents in Jackson's work required the exact same critical framework.
So when she applies the same framework to Jackson that she used for Shakespeare, what does that actually mean in practice? We often say Jackson is Shakespearean as, hyperbole, but structurally, what's the similarity?
Structurally, the methodology treats his entire creative output, the music, the lyrics, the interviews, the short films, the dance, and critically the written prose in Dancing the Dream, as a singular, unified literary and artistic canon.
A canon.
A canon. Shakespeare left behind plays, sonnets, poems, all studied as reflections of a single authorial intent. Jackson left behind music, videos, poetry, and fashion statements, all of which, when you collate and analyze them together, reveal his singular, overarching artistic and philosophical quest.
So it's about recognizing the intentionality behind all these diverse forms. The dialogue of a short film, the costume he wore on stage, and a poem he scribbled in a notebook. They're all just parts of one massive self-referential text.
Precisely. And it demands that you, as the listener or the researcher, treat the material with the utmost intellectual reverence. By setting this standard, comparing the methodology to studying Shakespeare, it instantly elevates Jackson above the status of mere celebrity.
It argues that his work is so dense, so interconnected, that to treat it casually means you're missing the profound artistic intentions that are driving the whole thing.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective leads us, inevitably, right to the written work, which serves as the literal key to unlocking that canon.
Okay, let's transition now to the core text. Dancing the Dream. We should probably define it first. It's a collection of 46 pieces of poetry and prose, published in 1992, and the analysis describes it as feeling like a very personal scrapbook.
That description, personal scrapbook, is essential. It immediately separates it from traditional biography. And Jackson himself, he was keenly aware of this distinction. He really cemented the status of Dancing the Dream in that 1995 simulchat.
Right. He was asked if he planned to write another book.
And his response was incredibly revealing about his intentions for this book for DTD.
He explicitly contrasted it with his 1988 autobiography, Moonwalker, which was, co-written and polished. What did he say exactly?
He said, and I'm quoting here, "I wrote a book called Dancing the Dream. It was more autobiographical than Moonwalker." And then he adds, "It wasn't full of gossip and scandal and all the trash that people write, so I don't think people paid much attention to it, but it came from my heart."
It came from my heart.
It contains essays, thoughts, things that I've thought about while on tour.
That's the critical nuance, isn't it? He saw Moonwalker as the curated, sanitized public narrative, a product created with the help of someone like Jackie Onassis. But DTD, with its raw essays and tour thoughts, that was the true, unvarnished window into his inner life. It reveals his authentic spiritual quest, his personal struggles, completely unfiltered by any publicist's needs.
It acts as an artistic confessional. It's a document of his spontaneous intellectual life. And the scholarly analysis of its structure is crucial for understanding how to properly read this intensely personal text.
And the analysis bypasses modern literary structures entirely. It connects it back to a pre-modern organizational method, the 17th century commonplace book.
It does.
Tell us about that structure. Why does that matter here?
Well, the commonplace book was a widespread literary practice, particularly in the 17th century. Leaders and writers would collate extracts, quotes, or their own musings under specific thematic headings like virtue, death, or love.
Okay.
It was a fiercely personal, continuous item, a reservoir of intellectual and spiritual nourishment compiled over time. DTD is structurally compared to this because, for one, it lacks a table of contents, and the entries are presented in a spontaneous stream of consciousness style.
Reflecting a dream state, as the analysis puts it.
Exactly. It's like a mind just wandering and recording philosophical ideas as they arrive.
So what does that structural comparison, the commonplace book, reveal about Jackson's artistic process that a regular book structure wouldn't?
It validates the idea that his artistry was inseparable from a continuous daily philosophical quest. He wasn't just sitting down quarterly to write a poem for an album. He was constantly compiling ideas, observations, spiritual notes.
So his artistic output was simply the externalization of this ongoing, fragmented intellectual work.
Yes, it suggests the art wasn't episodic. It was a constant living process of collection and reflection.
And yet, despite the complexity of the philosophy underneath it all, the writing style was deliberately accessible. He wanted to ensure this philosophical message could reach his entire global audience.
Oh, absolutely. The writings use what's called low to middle lexis. This means the vocabulary isn't designed to exclude you or require a university degree to interpret.
And there are a lot of illustrations.
Many accompanying illustrations, yes, targeted toward children, which underscores his commitment to that innocent perspective. But at the same time, adults are encouraged to delve into and interpret the profound philosophical and psychological complexities.
The philosophical implication there is so powerful. Jackson deliberately transcended cultural and educational barriers with his language, mirroring the universality of his music. He was ensuring his spiritual message was accessible to everyone, from a child in the inner city to an academic in a lecture hall.
And this universal philosophical message is most powerfully communicated when we look at the symbiotic relationship DTD has with his 1991 album.
This is where it gets really interesting.
This is it. The analysis terms Dancing the Dream, the musical twin of the Dangerous album. They feed lexically and thematically from one another, which makes the book absolutely crucial for interpreting the music.
And the evidence for this connection is concrete. It's quite striking, actually. 5 major works from DTD, including the title essay The Dance, Dancing the Dream, plus the powerful reflections Heal the World, Will You Be There, and Planet Earth.
All of them were shared.
They were shared between the published book and the Dangerous album liner notes. That's about a third of the written content you find in the album sleeve.
And this is a huge revelation for fans and critics alike. It means millions of people worldwide bought the Dangerous album.
An album characterized by themes of paranoia, identity crisis, social critique, betrayal, songs like Who Is It and Why You Want to Trip on Me.
Right. But simultaneously, as they're listening to that, they were reading passages of poetry and philosophy written by Michael Jackson in the liner notes, completely unaware they were holding excerpts from a separately published literary work.
So what's the academic consequence of that fact? How does knowing that poetry was deliberately put into the album packaging change how a listener interprets the Dangerous era?
The academic implication is profound. The analysis argues that because these philosophical excerpts were carefully nestled within the Dangerous liner notes, and I love this quote, the world already knows this book, wearing dangerous as its disguise. It stealthily made its way into millions of homes. The poetry provides the spiritual and philosophical counter-narrative to the album's often dark, reactive, and defensive tone.
So you have an album about social problems, tabloid attacks, personal crises, but it's simultaneously framed by the artist himself as a call to heal the world and respect planet Earth. The liner notes, therefore, aren't just decoration.
Not at all.
They are the intellectual frame Jackson provides for understanding the music's motivation.
Exactly. The book becomes an indispensable blueprint. It's a Rosetta Stone for translating the raw emotion and complexity of the Dangerous album. It moves the conversation away from the public spectacle of that era and redirects it toward Jackson's deeply held philosophical worldview.
A worldview that demanded compassion and transcendence even when he was facing his greatest turmoil.
That's it right there.
Okay, now that we understand the structure and the context of Dancing the Dream, let's move into the actual content.
Yeah.
Amisu's analysis categorized the 46 entries into 3 distinct components: philosophies, poems, and parables. And if we break these down, we can really see the inner workings of the artist's mind.
Let's start with the philosophies, which make up about 26% of the entries. These are direct meditations on core virtues. They're often presented as definitions or personal manifestos. Pieces like courage, innocence, love, magic. They extol the virtues Jackson saw as absolutely integral to not just survival, but to thriving.
So they function as a kind of spiritual code of ethics.
A code he tried to live by, yes.
And the most pivotal of these has to be the title piece, Dancing the Dream. It provides this sweeping metaphor for his entire philosophy of existence.
He views life explicitly as a performance, or more accurately, a dance. And this metaphor is so powerful because it elevates the physical art form he mastered, the dance, to a transcendental spiritual experience.
He writes that dancers come and go in the twinkling of an eye, but the dance lives on.
Which ties directly into a cyclical spiritual outlook. The implication being that the individual life is temporary, but the art, the purpose, the motion itself, that is eternal.
And that philosophy extends to his view of mortality as well.
Absolutely. In these reflections, death isn't presented as some abrupt finality. It's described as a smile, rapture, and cosmic reunification.
A reunification between the individual soul and the universal consciousness.
It's a profoundly peaceful and accepting view of the cycle of life, which is fascinating when you consider the immense pressures and fear he was facing in his daily existence.
So the philosophy provided the necessary spiritual balance to his volatile public life.
It had to. Next, we can move to the poems, which make up 37% of the collection. And this is where Jackson really establishes himself as a poet.
A lot of these poems focus heavily on children, right? Pieces like When Babies Smile and Magical Child.
They do. And the analysis often interprets this concentration on the pure, innocent child as a form of self-reference.
Jackson meditating on his own lost, commodified childhood.
Or trying to protect the idealized, innocent self he felt he had to constantly armor against the world.
And there's a perfect example of the direct translation of this written emotion into his music with the poem Ryan White.
This is one of the most moving examples of DTD acting as the emotional groundwork for his music. The poem Ryan White is directly connected to the Dangerous album tracks Gone Too Soon and Will You Be There.
The poem and the music work together.
They work together to exercise profound grief and simultaneously challenge public ignorance.
And just for context for you, the listener, Ryan White was a teenage hemophiliac who contracted AIDS from a contaminated blood treatment. He was then banned from his school because of widespread public panic and prejudice.
And in the poem, Jackson calls White a symbol of agony and pain, of ignorant fear gone insane. This shows the poems were not just abstract artistic musings, they were deeply rooted in specific social advocacy and personal loss.
They provided the emotional fuel that drove his recorded art.
The compassion he expressed for Ryan White is the exact same compassion he urges globally in his songs.
So finally, we get to the parables, which make up the largest segment at 39%. And these use narrative allegories, familiar concepts like animals or children, to teach unknown or abstract concepts. It echoes ancient literary and biblical traditions.
Amisu notes a powerful connection to biblical lessons here, specifically the parable of the talents, which Jackson clearly internalized. He viewed his immense talent, his voice, his dance, his platform, as a kind of investment given to him by a higher power.
And he felt he had a duty to use it.
A duty to use it and make the significant return on that investment for the benefit of the world. This framing defines his entire work ethic as a divine duty.
This also brings us back to his profound central theme of the elevation of children. This perspective is rooted in his own trauma, but the academic analysis frames it not just as sentimentality, but as a genuine philosophical stance.
Precisely. Jackson's unique philosophical position in these parables is that children, because they haven't learned prejudice or hatred yet, are elevated above adults. They are the inherently wise inheritors of paradise.
And the analysis argues this perspective is intensely personal.
It is, rooted in his traumatic early life. Children, unlike the press and the public, who constantly scrutinized his physical transformations and his choices, they just saw him as the same person. They provided him with a consistent, crucial source of validation and strength that adults couldn't offer.
And a listener might naturally ask, given the controversies that later plagued his public life, how does the academic analysis manage this intense focus on children?
The analysis frames it by emphasizing the philosophical context. Jackson's idealization of childhood is seen as a deliberate, spiritual act of self-preservation.
Protecting the magical child within himself.
Exactly. protecting it from the corruption of the adult world. It's less about simple adoration and more about recognizing innocence as the source of infinite creativity and purity, qualities he felt society actively tries to crush. The poems function as a way to hold on to that purity.
So if we synthesize these three categories, the philosophies, the poems, and the parables, we can clearly identify four core recurring themes that drove his artistry and define his legacy.
First and foremost is the unequivocal call for universal love and peace. His entire written philosophy urges compassion, inner peace, and non-judgment. Jackson believed love had this intrinsic power to transform individuals and heal the world.
He envisioned a global community where serenity began within the individual and was then extended outward.
The second is the profound focus on nature and conservation.
Right, the poem Planet Earth.
Exactly. Which, remember, was in the dangerous liner notes. Jackson viewed the natural world as both his muse and his sanctuary. The poem emphasizes the deep interconnectedness and fragility of the global ecosystem, advocating fiercely for responsible stewardship.
He believed nature was part of the same cosmic dance as mankind.
And his writings demand a collective spiritual awakening to preserve it. Third, continuing that thread from the parables, is the recurring elevation of the innocent.
It's more than just a preference, it's a moral imperative in his writing.
It is. Children represent the ideal state of humanity, unconditioned, pure, spiritually aware. He saw them as the litmus test for a healthy society. Whenever he wrote about them, he was arguing for a return to fundamental human purity, using their perspective to critique the failings of the adult world.
And finally, there's that strong thread of spirituality and transcendence that permeates the whole collection.
The prose, particularly in pieces titled God and On the Wall, illustrates a profound reverence for a higher power. It suggests a man on a continuous, almost desperate journey toward spiritual awakening, seeking enlightenment and deeper connections to a higher consciousness.
So Dancing the Dream confirms that for Michael Jackson, art, specifically the spontaneous, honest expression of his deepest thoughts, was the highest form of union between the material self and the spiritual realm.
That's the core of it, yes.
So while DTD provides the philosophical blueprint, the academic analysis of his later work focuses heavily on how he used his art as autobiography.
As a means of coping with and commenting on the hostile public environment he inhabited.
Exactly. Which brings us to the crucial themes of transformation and identity, which were so central to the Dangerous album.
Amisu's analysis really interrogates these ideas, seeing the album not just as a set of pop songs, but as a deliberate exploration of persona. In a track like In the Closet, for example, Jackson is analyzed through a theatrical lens. He becomes both the male object of desire,
The voice of the lover,
and the female object of desire with the spoken word segment. He's exploring duality and gender fluidity within his art.
and in other songs like Who Is It or Can't Let Her Get Away, he's not just singing about heartbreak. He's exploring the complexity of romance, identity, and social problems like the paranoia in Why You Want to Trip on Me.
The analysis concludes that he used these varied roles to explore love, desire, and social conflict, all while maintaining a strong sense of who he was beneath the various public personas.
And this duality, this conscious construction of identity, it extended powerfully beyond his music and into his most visible form of communication, his costumes and his fashion choices.
Which is a whole other layer.
The analysis of his fashion as conscious political symbols is highly compelling. It moves away from just calling it spectacle and relabels it as strategic armor.
It absolutely was armor. And it was rooted in an awareness of his heritage. Amisu's research places his fashion choices within a historical and theatrical context. She specifically analyzed his heavy use of military regalia, the gold braid, the high-collar jackets, the armband.
Okay.
And she connected it to early modern history. She notes the historical disappearance of the depiction of the black African king in art and culture due to the onset of the transatlantic slave trade.
So his adoption of this formal, regal military iconography was a deliberate statement of heritage and power.
Precisely. Yeah. Jackson, highly aware of his roots and the political weight of his position as a global black icon, consciously used this regalia to present himself, and I quote, wielding both social and political power through the use of costume, which ascribed to him the appearance of social standing and black power in what was clearly a predominantly white world.
It wasn't just authority, it was a profound nonverbal reclamation of status and heritage in the public eye.
That's it. It's fascinating to realize how much calculated philosophical intention underpinned choices that were often dismissed as eccentricity or superficial flair.
But this massive, globally visible identity came at a tremendous psychological cost. The research introduces a powerful metaphor for this burden. It calls Thriller's success the poisoned chalice.
This is a critical psychological insight from the analysis. Jackson was deeply traumatized by his childhood and still described as childlike at 24 when Thriller became the biggest album in history.
He became king of a global no man's land.
A space defined by fame, but utterly devoid of privacy or normal human contact. The success, while monumental, was perceived not just as a victory, but as an existential threat. A cup containing immense honor, but also bitter poison.
And the pressure that resulted from that success was, the analysis argues, artistically impossible to overcome. It created a feedback loop of creative dissatisfaction and public scrutiny.
He felt he could never live up to Thriller again, especially as the negative press escalated. His subsequent albums, Bad, Dangerous, and later History, they demonstrated incredible artistic versatility. They wove through rock, R&B, industrial sounds, pop.
And critically, the only unifying theme across these wildly different albums
Became Michael Jackson himself.
And why did that radical versatility make it impossible to surpass Thriller in the eyes of the consumer?
Because Thriller had a much more cohesive, genre-focused identity. It was easily digestible. His later albums were intentionally polymorphic. They refused to repeat the formula.
They were always changing.
This radical shifting made it impossible for the press or the general public, who often want repetition from a superstar, to critically define the subsequent albums in a way that could eclipse the previous one. The expectation of repeating Thriller's singular genre-defining moment became the poison he could never escape, regardless of the artistic quality of his new material.
And we get direct, real-time evidence of how Jackson processed this continuous pressure and hostility in that 1995 simulchat transcript. He was asked directly by a fan, "How do you keep going when you get so much bad press and tabloid garbage?"
And his answer perfectly encapsulates the philosophical resilience we see developing in Dancing the Dream. He replies with remarkable clarity, "I move ahead. I don't pay attention to that tabloid junk. It's garbage."
"I have my dreams. I am a visionary, and I am very resilient."
And then he says, "I feel as if I have a suit of armor around me, like a rhinoceros skin." This confirms that his resilience was a conscious strategy, a form of spiritual defense built to protect that philosophical core he outlined in his writings.
And his subsequent answers reveal a profound longing for the anonymity that his fame had utterly shattered. He admitted to wearing every disguise you can think of just to move freely.
Then he's asked which superhero he would be.
And he doesn't choose Superman or Batman. He chooses Morph from the X-Men.
And his reason is so telling. He chose Morph because, as he explained, he can become anything. He constantly transforms himself. That is why I wish I could be morphed so I could change places and just enjoy life.
That desire for continuous, unconstrained transformation, it connects explicitly and tragically to the theme of identity in his art.
It reveals that his constant physical and artistic shifts, which baffled the public, were rooted in a fundamental human wish for freedom and anonymity, the ability to simply disappear and be ordinary.
Let's shift focus slightly, because that simulchat offers an invaluable technical nugget that sheds light on Jackson's role as composer and auteur. It links his creative process right back to his body and his voice.
This is a remarkable detail that often gets overlooked. He shared his unique method for songwriting, stating that the foundation of nearly every track he wrote, since he was a child, begins not with an instrument,
but with his voice.
with his voice creating a vocal rhythm to a simple click track, which is just a timed beat.
He explained that he uses mouth sounds, beatboxing, vocal tics that are then looped and built upon. He said, "This is your foundation for the entire track. Everything plays off this. It's the rhythm, like the beatbox rhythm."
And this detail is so crucial because it establishes Jackson as an auteur, whose finished product stems entirely from a foundational sonic blueprint that originates physically from his own body.
He wasn't relying on complex musical theory or instruments initially.
No, the rhythm, the emotional core, the structure, it all came from his innate physical sense of timing and musicality. He was using his voice as the primary untranslated instrument of composition. It's the ultimate statement of artistic control.
And finally, we have to recognize him as a technological pioneer. This 1995 simulchat was revolutionary. It was one of the earliest large-scale celebrity interactions conducted using those early internet services like CompuServe and AOL.
It was pioneering for its time, and it demonstrated his visionary outlook extended far beyond music and dance. When he was asked about technology like the internet, he didn't sound detached. He was engaged and really prophetic.
What did he say?
He responded, "I think this is incredible technology, just amazing, and I think we're pioneering here. In the next year, we will see some amazing growths in technology, and I hope that I'm around to see it."
It just places him firmly at the cutting edge of global digital communication in its infancy. He saw the internet itself as another medium for his universal message.
Another stage.
So this deep dive has shown us that Michael Jackson intentionally channeled his personal struggles, his profound spirituality, and his deep love of humanity directly into his literary work. Dancing the Dream is definitively not supplemental material.
No, it's the vital, critical context required for a full understanding of his music and the complex public persona he was forced to develop.
The analysis insists that Jackson masterfully used his art, his poetry, his voice, and even his highly visible fashion choices as deliberate forms of communication.
They served simultaneously as expression, as social commentary, and critically as intellectual armor against a relentless, hostile world. We can only really access his mortal persona, the human being beneath the global icon, by engaging seriously with his philosophical writings.
The conclusion of Dancing the Dream shows Jackson meditating intensely on achieving personal peace, a peace rooted firmly in his often tumultuous lived experience. His final reflections urge unity and remind us that despite life's challenges, we retain the power to achieve inner serenity and connect with the eternal dance.
And we noted earlier that the scholarly analysis structurally compared his collection of thoughts to a 17th century commonplace book, a fiercely personal, continuous record of philosophical musings and crude wisdom.
It was a deliberate act of recording one's most vital beliefs.
Right. And considering this profound intentionality, we want to leave you, the listener, with a question to ponder. What personal philosophical musings are you intentionally keeping track of in your own life? And what do those collected reflections reveal about your true intentions, your deepest beliefs, and the legacy you are quietly building?
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the literary and philosophical genius of Michael Jackson and the academic process required to fully appreciate his art. If you did, please subscribe, like, and comment to share your own thoughts on the profound implications of Dancing the Dream and what it means to study a global icon as a true canonical figure.
Thank you for listening to VSOW.